If I sounded all exasperated, it's not because I didn't like Ted 2, it's because I was in the middle of recording this, and just as I was in the mood, the phone rang, and I had to disrupt my mojo, and I unfortunately have no way of stopping and starting, so I have to record this whole thing again. But let's talk about Ted 2. Now, as you may remember from my thoughts going into, I didn't have much of an interest in seeing Ted 2. Not because I didn't enjoy the first one. I did enjoy the first one, but I wasn't a huge fan of A Million Ways to Die in the West, and I was convinced Seth was a one-hit wonder. The trailers for Ted 2 showed a lot. At least I thought they did. They don't really, but it looked like it was, and I was worried they were going to show the best gags in the trailer. And again, just given the way just comedy sequels tend to go, where they're just terrible, or not terrible, but not good, I wasn't looking forward to it, especially considering after Hot Tub Time Machine 2 and Hangover sequels. It's hard to have faith in a comedy sequel. Now, you're probably wondering what I think of this film, especially considering this is a film that's dividing audiences. And there's a very good reason why it's dividing audiences. It's getting very mixed reviews. It's not getting the positive reviews that Ted got, but at the same time, it's not getting the negative reviews that it's getting a fair share of both, and then a fair share of indifferent. And I think the reason for it is because of this. First off, if you're a Seth MacFarlane fan or Family Guy fan, you've probably already seen this film, so what I'm about to say doesn't apply to you. But if you're on the fence about whether or not to go see Ted 2, turn on your TV and watch an episode of Family Guy. Specifically, want some of the more recent episodes, stuff that came out when the show came back. And if you like what you see, go see Ted 2. If you don't, just never see Ted 2, or just wait for it to come out on DVD or on demand. And the reason why I say this is because Ted 2 is an episode of Family Guy. It opens with this sort of musical number thing, kind of similar to the opening of Family Guy. There's not much of a story, it's just sort of meandering, and the star of the show are the random gags and the cutaway gags, not necessarily the main story. Essentially what you see on Family Guy. And if you like that stuff, if you enjoy that stuff, you'll get through the movie just fine. But if you cannot stand Family Guy, if you do not see this movie, because it has everything you don't like about Family Guy in here. And again, considering how divided everyone is on Family Guy, that's ultimately what's going to determine how you feel about it. And I thought Ted 2 was a guilty pleasure. In that I was laughing at it, but I didn't feel like I should. It wasn't worth laughing at. And I feel like this is a film where if I go back and I rewatch it, another time or two more times, I'm probably going to hate it. But for just seeing it in the theater right now, I enjoyed it. There were people. My dad, who's a huge MacFarlane fan, was cracking up at various jokes. There was this group of teenagers sitting to the left of me who were laughing at some of the jokes. And it's clearly the MacFarlane crowd. And ironically enough, it was a Sunday night screening, and there were still a fair amount of people, a decent amount of people, a couple people there. It was a bit more than A Million Ways to Die in the West, where it was just me and my dad, one other couple, and there was this one woman who just laughed hysterically at the Neil Patrick Harris hat poop joke. But anyway, I digress. So let me just get into the story, or at least the lack of this film has. It's basically picks up right where a year after Ted ends. He's marrying his girlfriend, Tammy, and they're trying to have a baby, trying to have family life, and not only do they have trouble, getting a baby because they want to have a baby because they'll bring their family together, but apparently Ted isn't a person, in the eyes of the law, and he's losing all his rights, so Ted decides to sue for his rights, and they get a lawyer, played by Amanda Seyfried, who for some reason still does these movies, even though she's capable of much more, yet for some reason, surprisingly, doesn't completely embarrass herself. And that's the plot. And I think the biggest problem with this film is that it's very unfocused. It's very all over the place. Like, and it's one of those things where what works for television on Family Guy doesn't necessarily work in a movie. Because in Family Guy, there isn't much of a story. It's like something happens, cutaway gag, something happens, random gag, something happens, cutaway gag. And that works for like a 20 to 30 minute cartoon, but for a 2 hour movie, it can get exhausting and drag, and especially when not all those scenes are engaging, it can just sort of lead to this boring slog. So as a result, like this film is 2 hours long, and you can really feel its length when none of the some of the jokes hit, but when none of them are hitting and the film's just not really going anywhere. And you could have easily cut out like 30 minutes of this film. Like, there are segments of this film that just don't go anywhere and aren't even that funny, and I feel like could have been cut out. Like, there's a scene where they're driving somewhere and the car breaks down. They spend like 15 minutes just camping out and nothing happens even remotely funny. It's just Seth wants to do a couple random gags that I won't ruin, but again, they aren't that funny, and I'm just sitting there the whole time thinking, you could have cut this entire sequence out and nothing would have changed. And it's sort of like Despicable Me 2. There's a story that the film will occasionally focus on, but it's more about the gags. And the random cutaway gags are good, but here's the thing. The stretches of time between these random gags that surprisingly sometimes work is much longer in the film than on a Family Guy show. And it also hurts the fact that the film doesn't have any heart, any emotional thing to sort of keep you engaged while the jokes aren't coming. In the first film, Mark Wahlberg was the main character. Johnny was the main character, and I generally identified with his struggle to grow up, move on from Ted. His relationship with Ted was good. There's no real heart here, and it's Ted's story, which I'm okay with it. But the thing is that John has nothing to do. I mean, he has some stuff to do, but it's like most of the time it just feels like he's sort of there. And when you can, the fact that he was the heart of the film, to just sort of see him just not be there, just sort of be there, is kind of an underwhelming thing. And this didn't bother me until I realized it, because I haven't seen Ted 2 since like I saw it a couple of years ago, and I kind of don't remember all the details. But now that once someone mentioned this in a review, it sort of came back to me. Part of John's reason about moving on was because he was trying to change for his girlfriend, played by Mila Kunis, and grow up for her and make it work for her. So to have her not show up, just give her a throwaway line, "Oh yeah, we broke up," which I hate when we do that in films. It's like, because it's sort of just, but, I mean, it depends on the character, but this time it felt especially annoying because it's like, so you went through all this trouble just to change for her, and then it just didn't work out. It's like, so what was the point of going for that? It's like in Terminator, like, where they go for all the trouble to take out Skynet, and then the third one's like, oh yeah, Judgment Day is inevitable. So essentially they could have done nothing in Terminator 2. Thanks, movie. Yeah, but there is no heart. That's not to say that there are some funny gags, but I'm mostly just laughing at the absurd directions this story goes in and the absurd ways Seth chooses to spend. I'm assuming bigger budget he got for this film, and just watching him make a live action Family Guy movie, because that's essentially what it is. So again, that's my verdict. I laughed at it, but in a guilty way. I mean, I didn't hate it like a million ways did I. I think it helped that there is nothing out right now that I want to see. I want to see Mad Max, but unfortunately it's no longer playing. But there was nothing like I'm kicking myself to see, and I guess that is sort of a problem with this summer, is that there is nothing pressing to see. Like 2014, oh my gosh, like you had X-Men, Godzilla, How to Train Your Dragon 2. And yeah, there's Inside Out's like the only real film from June I was looking forward to seeing. And I mean, Ant-Man's coming out in July, but that's more obligatory. I mean, this has been a pretty dry year so far, but I mean, I'll get more into that when I do my best and worst list at the end of the year. So yeah, if you're, again, if you haven't seen Ted 2 already and you're trying to prioritize this with our movies, don't sweat it. You're not missing much. You can rent this if push comes to shove. If there's like something else you want to see in theaters, you can wait on Ted 2. But if you want to see Ted 2 but you're nervous about it, do you like Family Guy? If so, go see it. And you'll more or less be alright with it. I mean, it was sort of for me, but again, like, a fair amount of it worked. Like, enough of it worked, even if it was poorly constructed, that it was somewhat worth my time. And now that I'm done, I'm going to talk about the 17 minutes worth of trailers I got, which only comes down to about 6. So if you don't want to hear about it, just sign out here. If not, stick around. First, we got the trailer for Trainwreck, which I don't remember anything about, which is probably a bad sign. I mean, let me just Google it real quick and see if it jogs my memory. Oh crap, I just did not want to open Safari. But yeah, like, I'll just put an annotation later saying what I thought. But I mean, if I can't remember it, that's probably a bad sign. I wrote in my notes, it doesn't look... Oh yeah, now I remember! It's that stupid-looking comedy with that guy from The Office. Yeah, that doesn't look good at all. Then there's some film about some African Americans on the radio. I forgot to take down the title, so... I think it is Ice Cube and a bunch of rappers in it. It looked interesting and refreshing, especially in comparison to everything else, since it was somewhat serious. I got American Ultra, which, first time hearing about that film, it looks like it might be the underrated film of the summer. It might. I mean, the premise looks interesting. The trailer made me chuckling. It seems like Kristen Stewart's doing something new of herself. Maybe this will help... Between this and Still Alice, maybe this will shape her career, but we'll have to see. Daddy's Home, another stupid Will Ferrell comedy. And plus it's the family rivalry story, which has been done to death in comedies. I got Ant-Man, but I've already talked about that film enough, and I mentioned my thoughts going into, so not really going to talk about it. Gonna try and see Ant-Man. And then there's Hitman, which looks interesting. I mean, I haven't played the video game. I probably should, but the trailers make it look pretty faithful. Like, it seems like a game where fans of the game are probably really pumped for this movie and really excited for this movie. It's like probably one of those movies that it's not going to do well just because of the small box office, but it looks like the fans of the game are going to get what they want. And, you know, considering how I'm kind of still shrugging my shoulders at Assassin's Creed, Warcraft, and Uncharted, was like, this actually looks promising. Like, unlike the Prince of Persia movie, Disney. I think Disney did it. So Ted 2 review is going to be in the description below. Leave your thoughts on Ted 2 in the comments below. Like, dislike, and subscribe. And this is JStar260, and I'll see you guys later. Until then, take care.